thing. And then I'm going to spotlight myself so you can see what's going on. Okay, so I hope you can all see that. So today we're going to start with the first pattern I'm going to do is a partridge and orange. And as I mentioned in the preamble here, there's a bunch of different ways of tying the partridge and orange. This is the more robust of the ones. This is the one I'll tie for you. It's on a size 10 hook. The body, the thread I'm going to tie is an orange 8/0. The body is an orange floss, and the hackle is a partridge hackle. Now, the key technique of this is that I'm going to show you is tying the hackle in and how you wrap the hackle. So this one is on a size 10. That's the one I'm going to tie. But I'll show you a few others. That's a size 12, and that uses a slightly darker hackle, but it's the same basic fly. This is size 14. And this is a size 16. So going from 12, 14, 16, you can see they're all different look, but they're all the same pattern in effect. The other thing you can do is you can tie them with dubbing. This one has an orange dubbed body. And this one, it's almost all, the body is just a little bit of thread with a little ball of dubbing to help splay the hackle out. And quite often when you're tying them on 16s and 18s, it's that particular style that you use on the really small ones because it's a little awkward trying to tie on really small hooks. I'm going to use a size 10 hook. This is a Mustad 101 dry fly hook. It's a light wire hook, and it's actually a little longer shank. The other ones that I've been tying on have been on the Hannock size 10 dry fly hook, which is a little more robust hook. So we'll start the pattern with 8/0 thread, and I will start right behind the eye of the hook, and I will cover the hook shank with tying thread, and I'm going to take it right back to just in front of the point of the hook. None of the versions of this that I've seen go all the way back to the bend. They tend to start at the point, or they're shorter. I'm just going to adjust the screen here a little bit so you can see me in more fly. Looks like it's okay. So then I'll bring my thread right back up towards the eye. And I'm going to stop about an eye width and a half behind the eye of the hook, because that's as far forward as I want the body to go. I want that last eye width and a half for the hackle. I'll take my floss, and this is actually an acetate floss. You can use regular floss. I like the acetate because it shines a bit better. And this is way too thick for the body that I'm going to build. So because it's not twisted, I can take about half of those fibers and pull them away. So I'm not making a very robust body on this thing. And I'll hold it in my left hand with a little bit sticking out here. I will trim it square. I'll put my floss down so it extends a little bit past the eye. I'll make one loose wrap over the top to put it on the hook. And then I'll give it a slight pull backwards and bind down the end of the floss. That way I don't have to trim it. I'll wrap over the floss, open wraps right down to where the end of the body was before. Bring my thread forward to that same one, I went in half from the front. Now I'm going to take the floss and I will wrap it forward and back. And the idea behind this is to build a bit of a tapered body, skinny at the back and thicker in the middle, and then a little bit skinnier as you get to the eye. I don't want to twist this, so I'm using my hackle pliers. And every time I come around, I will try to take a little twist out of the floss, because every time you twist, it'll tend to twist the floss. And I want to take that twist out because I want the floss to spread out a little bit. You can see it's going on the hook almost flat. And I have to take that clockwise twist out of every wrap. That's why these rotating hackle pliers are really nice for that. These Griffin are really good for taking the twist out of that floss or thread. Now I'm going to go back in a little more open turns with it untwisted. You can see how it's spread out. I'll go back and stop just a shy of where the tail was. And then I'll wrap forward the same way with the floss, nicely untwisted so it lays flat. Then right there where the thread is tying in, I'll bring it up at a couple of wraps in behind. Swap hands, a couple of wraps in front. And come down on top of the hook and trim it off nice and tight. You'll see there's a little tuft of floss sticking up there. What I want to do is wrap right where that is. I don't mind if this is a little bulky in here where I've just wrapped down the floss, because that's where I'm going to put the stem, and I want that stem to spread the hackle out a little bit with some material in behind. So you can see there's a little bit of a bump where the shank is. Just get the little bits of it. Now the next thing is hackle. The hackle for these is Partridge. And I have bags of Partridge hackle, many of them. And they're all a little bit different. So what I have, and Florin will recognize that label. This will tell you that this is about 30 years old, this bag of Partridge hackle. But the thing I like about it, this was kind of randomly, I think Reg must have gotten a bird and he must have plucked it himself and put all these little feathers in there, because there's a real assortment of feathers, sizes, and colors in the bag. So I've pulled out a few that you can work with, I can work with. So here's a little darker version. And this one is probably about right in terms of length of hackle. I want the length of the hackle to be about the length of the body. So I'll hold that one for a minute. I've got some lighter ones that I pulled out of the bag. Here's one that has nice markings, light speckled markings. And if you look at the length of the fibers, that's about right, maybe a little shy. Here's one that's, again, a little darker. This one here probably is, the hackle fibers are maybe a little long, but I can measure that up against what, oh, that one actually probably will work. The other kind of Partridge hackle that you get are the really dark ones. They look like this. And that's what I've done a couple of them with the dark hackle. So you can kind of take a pick of the colors and shade and patterns on the Partridge, because you'll get different stuff in each package. I kind of like the lighter colored stuff. It just makes the fly look lighter. So there's my hackle. And you can see I'm going to use this part of the hackle. And that's about the right length. It's about body length. To prepare the hackle, remember I was talking about after shaft feathers when we were previously talking about pheasant rump. This is an after shaft feather that a partridge has, and it's really fluffy and fuzzy. I don't have ever found a use for it. The one on that pheasant you can use. I'll take that off, and then I'm going to take all the fluffy hackle and I'm going to pull it off the stem so that all I have left is stem for the fuzzy parts. And you can see now I've got a nice shaped hackle. I'm going to make sure it ends up even. Now, some guys want to tie these really sparse, and they'll actually strip off half of the feather to keep the hackle very sparse. I like mine to have a little more bulk to them. Then what I do here is I wet my fingers and I will not strip, but just pull back a little bit to get about, again, about a shank length of hackle that's been pulled back. Because I'm only going to need, maybe 3 at the most 4 wraps of hackle to complete this fly. Now you see this little bit here on the end. What I do with that is I turn the feather so that the darkly colored side faces me, and the feather tends to curve away from me. I'm going to lay that down right where my thread is, that little notch between the folded back hackle and the tip. And I'll do a wrap right over top of that, right behind the eye. Do 2 or 3 good solid wraps. I'll lift the tip up and do 1, 2 wraps in front. And then I pull that thing forward and get the other hackle, part of the hackle out of the way, get my scissors right in there and trim off the tip. It's not cooperating. There we go. A couple of little bits sticking out here. I use my tweezers to get any uncooperative fibers out of the way. Then I'll wrap that down good and snug. Leave my feather a little less than an eye width behind the eye. Once again, I'll take my Griffin handlebars and grab the stem. And I will hold it straight up. Wet my fingers, and we'll do what we call fold the hackle. I've got the intensely colored part facing the front of the fly now. And I will use my thumb and forefinger and fold those fibers back around the stem. See how they go fold back? And I want to stroke those back so they're nice and smooth right behind. Then I'll make a wrap around the stem. As I come under the stem, I'm going to want to, again, use my thumb and forefinger to stroke those hackle fibers back. That's 2. And as I said, you're lucky if you get 3. It came out, this broke off the stem. Let's try that again. That happens. These hackles are pretty delicate. 2. And then when I get to the bare stem, I will wrap over top. And then I'll wrap in front. And once again, I will pull that forward a bit, slide my scissors down, and just nip it off. Making this little shape with my fingers, I'll pull that hackle back out of the way, and I will wrap the end of the stem down. Don't want to build much of a big head on this. And at this point, I will do a whip finish. And I will do one because I don't want to build up a lot of bulk on the head here. Take the edge of my scissors up and not cut the thread so much as just push it up against that sharp edge. And a little bit of Sally Hansen's hard as nails just to cement the head only. Now, of course, that's going to clog up the eye if you're not careful. So use my bodkin just to make sure I have the glue out of the eye of the hook. And this gets really challenging when you get down to a size 18, let me tell you, because that size eye is not bad. And I'm at the stage in my life now where I'm not going to be fishing any size 18s because I can't get the tip it through the eye. And that's it. That's a partridge in orange.
I had a bunch of those in my fly box and I forgot what they were called, Dave.
And again, you can tie them with the really short body. It basically looks like a piece of fluff with a hackle. Now, we used to fish these on a little pond just south and east of Edmonton at the town of Beaumont. It was a stock pond. And in the spring, as soon as the midges started to hatch, this was the only thing that worked. This guy that was really short, it looked like a piece of fluff with legs. And you'd pitch that thing out there and let it sit and maybe a little twitch retrieve. And the fish would come up and smack it. They were taking midge emergers. So you know how small some of those midges are in the early spring. So that's what that is. If you're fishing chironomids in the spring and you're seeing a rise, it's worth it to have a few of these in your fly box because they do work. So that's number one. Now, number two pattern is also a midge type pattern. And it's called Henry's Lake Renegade. Now, Henry's Lake is, I think it's in Yellowstone. And it's also a midge imitation, more like a cluster of midges, because when these midges hatch, sometimes they come up in batches and they kind of get stuck in the surface film. The original of this was a pattern that was tied in eastern US, and it had a brown hackle at the back and a white hackle in the front, and it was tied with peacock herl body and with black thread. Now with the Henry's Lake, this is one we used to use out at Muir Lake and a couple of the local lakes around Edmonton in the midsummer when we started to get these midge hatches, and you started to get some weed patches showing up on the lake. And I can remember one day it was me and a buddy of mine were paddling around the outside edges of these weed patches and casting into the openings in the weeds with one of these flies. And we had just a spectacular day. The fish really seemed to like them. So that's another one. So these are ties on size 10. So I'm going to do this on a standard 10-inch. Again, the same dry fly hook. Now you can tie these, I wouldn't tie them much smaller than 14s. And you can probably tie them up as much as size 8. So materials for these, I'm using red 8/0 thread. And I've got a UTC 140, which is a little heavier thread. It'd be like 6/0, I guess. And I'm going to use that for the rip. So what I do with this is the same thing. I'll start at the eye of the hook. And I don't know if you guys are probably experienced tyers, but for some of the beginners, I say that if you hold the thread up at this 45-degree angle as you make your loose wraps down the hook, one of the things that makes it easier for getting a covered hook is that as you wrap onto that tilted thread, it tends to force the wrap down onto the hook right up against the last wrap. So you don't end up with gaps. Now this one, I want to go right down to the where the barb of the hook was. That one I think I haven't brushed down yet. I'll have to do that later. Cut that off. I'm going to bring my thread back up to about 1/8 of an inch behind the eye. I'm going to take this slightly thicker thread. Now, I'm using the 8/0 to tie, and you could probably, if you want to really have the red prominent in the body of the fly, you could probably use like 3/0 red. This is like 6/0. So I'm going to tie that down at the eye and do the same thing. What I'm doing with this is I'm covering up the inside of the body with thread so that it provides a nice base for the peacock. Okay, now the next thing is hackle. The hackle on this fly is what's called furnace. And I have, this is a neck hackle. And by furnace, what it means is that it's brown with a dark core. You can see there's a distinctively dark core in the center. You can also tie them with plain tan hackle, which is what these are. Now you're going to use 2 hackles for this. So I went into my necks and I pulled out a couple of matching pairs in terms of length of hackle and length of the barbs. I'm going to tie it with the furnace. So I'll take out the matching pair of furnace hackles. And the way you match them up is you pull them out of the same part of the neck, right side by side. These ones are fair. No, that's not the right one. Yeah, there we go. So there we go. We have basically matching lengths and matching length of hackle. So for this guy, I'm going to do the same thing as I've done with the partridge. What I want to do with it is I want to go down to, yeah, that's what I want. I want to measure where the hackle is about a little less than shank length of the body, probably 1.5 to almost 2 times the gap of the hook in terms of the length of the barbules. And I will strip back to expose the stem right at that point. And I will get that exposed stem about 1/4 inch long, and I'll trim the bottom end of it off. Now this is a dry fly hackle, so I want it to, when it's wrapped, I want it to cup forward a bit, so it makes a nice right angle with the hook shank and maybe a bit curved forward. So I'm going to tie that with the intensely colored side of the hackle away, facing away from me. And I'm going to put that stem down right where the thread is hanging. Snug it down, bind it down so that it's on there good and tight. Now I'm going to wrap this hackle. Once I get my thread, my butt wrapped down properly of the feather, just spiral the 2 wraps up the thread shank to get the thread out of the way for me to wrap the hackle. When I'm finished wrapping, I'll undo the unwrap of that. So I'll grab it by the tip. So this is the conventional way of hackling, is you tie the butt in as opposed to the previous pattern. Come on, get on there. I'm having trouble grabbing onto the tip this morning. There you go. These are fairly fine hackles. Get in there. There we go. So I'm going to wrap that around. And you'll see that the curve of the hackle tends to go to the front. And I will wrap the wraps sometimes in between. I don't need to make one wrap right in front of the other. What I want to do with this is miss the point of the hook to start with. And I want to get some interspersion of the hackle because I want it to be fairly robust and compact where I've got it tied in. And when I get about 4 or 5 turns of hackle, see it creates about, I'd say, 1/8 of an inch worth of hackle back there. I will unwrap where I ran my thread up the shank to back where it was. I'll wrap over top of the tip of the hackle a couple times, pull it back, wrap in front, and then again get my thread out of the way so I don't accidentally cut my thread, and trim it. Then I bring my thread up to about 1/8 of an inch behind the eye where I'm going to put the second hackle. And it's at that point that I get the other body material for this, which is Peacock Herl. And for the Peacock Herl body, I'm going to need 2 or 3 strands that are reasonable length. If you're going to take it off the feather, you want the ones that are the fuzziest. So I'm going to get a couple of those. Take 3. You can get by with 1 or 2 on a smaller hook, but on the 10, I need the length and I need the thickness of the body to make it more fuzzy. And so I line these guys up. And you'll see that with this particular type of peacock, or this one, they tend to be more fuzzy at the tips than they are at the butt end. So I'm going to tie these in by the tip because I want the body to be fuzzy to start with. So I'll kind of line them up, and I will cut the tips off like I did before, about 1/8 of an inch in front of my fingers. Lay it down on the hook shank and wrap them in. And then wrap the thread back down over top of them. Then I'll bring this ribbing thread up in between the hackle and tie it down with the. Then I'm going to bring my tying thread up out of the way, up to that point where it's about 1/8 of an inch behind the eye. Now I've got my thread interspersed with the hackle. And what I'll do, that's that rib is interspersed with, I'm going to take my hackle pliers with that thread and give it a spin. And then I will wrap the body. And I want my body to be moderately robust. So you see how that red thread pokes through as we wrap? I'll just use the last of my fingers because it's getting a little unruly. So I want this body to be fairly robust. And up in there, and then tie in front, and again trim it off at the top so I don't cut my thread. Now I'll take my second hackle and I'll prep it the same way, about shank length of hackle, maybe a little less. Strip off the fuzzies, back 1/4 inch or so, trim the end off, put the colored side facing away from me, and tie the stem in right behind the eye there. Bring my thread forward, but right behind the eye. Hackle pliers on the tip. And again, I will do the same thing. I will wrap, wiggling the hackle back and forth. I will wrap a nice robust hackle in the front. And then right up to where the eye of the hook is. That hackle was a little long. I must have blown the other matching hackle off the table. Well, that wasn't the prettiest one, I'll tell you. Got my hackle mismatched. I think the other hackle I used, I must have blown onto the floor. Oh yeah, there it goes. Rats. That would have been a much better hackle. Maybe I can undo that guy. Try that again. Because that was pretty ugly. Okay, there we are. That's a better hackle. The other one was a little bit on the soft side. So once again, we'll go through this. Expose the stem, about 1/8 of an inch of stem. Trim it off. Tie it in with the intensely colored side facing away from me. That looks better. Tip. And my hackle pliers don't want to grab today for some reason. There we go. There we go. That's a much better match, both in color and size. And tie it off. Again, pull these back with your fingers and get a teeny head on the front. And then a whip finish. We're almost done. Glue. Now here's a little trick I discovered when you're gluing and your hackle is at the front. If you can take the remaining hackle stem that you have and you can put it through the eye of the hook like that, and then suck it through. And what that does is that cleans all the glue out. So you don't have to use your bodkin to get the glue out. Your eye is nice and clean. So there's the Henry's Lake Renegade. There you go. Two good midge patterns that I have found quite useful. So Florin, you're up now. Let me get my spotlight off. There we go. So Florin, you're in business.
I am, yes. Thank you. Thank you, Dave. Let's see. We have a vise and we have a fly. But this is what I was going to do, hopefully a little prettier than the one I have in the vise. So this is a Marabou. The central ingredient here is Marabou, and the idea is streamers that basically collapse very nicely when wet. You can achieve a similar effect at a much higher cost, I think, by using our Arctic Fox, and I've shown you some Arctic Fox streamers. Now, the way I like to tie these flies is prepare a bunch of bodies and then put the wings on. And the reason I'm doing this is because what I'm using here on the, so this is standard stuff, so you've seen this a million times. The tail is just some kind of red hackle, whatever you happen to have handy. Either red dyed chicken of some kind. Go on the soft side though, ideally. Some of the original patterns call for, actually the originals call for nothing here, but I find that a bit of red here is nice. And traditionally wet flies would have things like dyed red, you know, duck quill. That's a very stiff material. I'm not very fond of it. This is goose shoulder. It's a little bit softer. And then of course, there's the option of some red marabou, which is even softer. Okay, so I have some flies, I have some bodies that I'm preparing with marabou tails as well. This is what they look like when they're dry. And of course, they look very different once you get them wet. Right, so here's a wet tail. All right, so hook is prepared. I have, you know, a bunch of these things ready to go. And then some thread. For thread, I like to use in this size hook and larger, I go with 6/0 uni thread. That's a very good general all-purpose thread. Attach here at the front. Oh, and the reason, perhaps the main reason why I'm using these prepared hooks like this is I'm using some Christmas tinsel that's like a silver holographic that's reasonably fragile, and I rib it with wire. So I wrap the tinsel, then I rib it with wire, and then I give it a coat of Sally Hansen's and let it sit to dry up. And that protects that fragile tinsel, which otherwise I like the looks of very much. Okay, and now for the wing, the original stuff simply says put some marabou on a silver body and then a topping. But I'm going to do a bit of an overdressed fly to show you various options. So if you cast your flies rather than troll them, and you find that the marabou would have a tendency to go and hook itself around the wire of the hook, one way to prevent things from misbehaving is to use a little bit of an underwing. So for example, you can use, in this particular case, I'm using whatever I have handy on the bench, but you can use anything that's a little stiffer. So bucktail, synthetic hair that's a little bit stiffer, but not very stiff. This is something that's called super hair, and it's a bit translucent. You can use a bit of white polar bear here. So what I'm having right now here is it just happens to be what I have really. There's no particular magic about it. Okay, other than this is going to provide some support for the marabou wing. Okay, so tie this on a couple of turns. Don't use your good scissors on stuff like this because it's kind of hard, tough plastic. Secure this properly. And then go back to where the body begins. Okay, so this is, you don't want this to be sitting up, you just want it to be kind of low, lying low on the body. And then I'm taking a whole marabou plume, which the camera doesn't like very much. And I'm going to separate this. I'm not going to tie the whole feather in because that's just going to create a big mess. So what I do is I take the tip of the feather right here and I pull the other fibers towards the base of the feather. Then I sneak in my scissors and trim it off. So now I have a big piece of marabou left on the remaining stem, and I have the tip of the feather. If you don't like these straight fibers, you can discard this. If you don't mind the straight fibers, just tie it on top. So measure here to length. And the typical measurement is to half the length of the tail. So that's kind of the idea, which on the way you do standard proportions would be reaching to about where the bend of the hook is. There you go. Secure this. Now, this looks like a lot of material already, but as I said, when this thing gets wet, it's not that much, in fact. And so I'm going to need more. Now, what I do at this stage is, needless to say, a vacuum cleaner handy to use after you've done this is probably not a bad idea. So what I do is I have now my feather like this, and I'm going to take a clump of Marabou. There are different ways you can try to do this. You can take the whole feather, you know, like this, and fold it. And probably on a hook this small, this would work, because I'm not going to get any of the stem in there. So if you see here the length, that might work. So let's do the easy way. You can separate clumps, you can tie this in 3 sections, whatever. I'm going to just take whatever is left of the feather. No, it's actually too long, sorry. That's not gonna work. Okay. So back to the feather. Hopefully I can show some of this on camera. And I'm going to rip off one side. Okay. I got half of the feather cleaned up. And I've got this big clump of Marabou. Again, having a little bowl of water if you don't want to lick your fingers. Maybe a good way to proceed at this stage. So I just got my fingers wet and got the Marabou wet, so it's easy to play with. So again, measure it. And attach with a couple of turns of thread. Don't need much. Cut off the excess. And now for the remaining fibers, now that's a little bit more challenging because you have nothing left on the other side of the feather to grab. So I'm just going to get that wet. And add it on top. So measure again. Oops. Bad. Okay, let me go back here. I was perhaps a little greedy at this stage, and I didn't build a proper ramp off. There you go. Okay. So back to the last little bit of Marabou. So put that on top. Secure and tie it off. Okay. I kind of overbuilt my head here. I should have used maybe 8/0 thread. All right. The main idea here is to use a topping to give some contrast and make it look like the back of a bait fish. So in this case, what I'm going to use is a few strands from a peacock eye feather. So these are the fibers that come from closer to the eye of the feather. You can see here I've used a bunch of the feathers, a bunch of the Herls. They're in this region. So as you go further up, the tips of these things get a little bit too fine. So you're going to have to either cut them off, which doesn't look very good, or get a new feather. Okay. But the nice thing about the Herls generally are fairly fragile material, but as you get closer to the eye and into the eye, the Herls get a lot stronger. So it's a better material, and that's why it looks a little bit, a little bit skinny and beat up. So I'm going to bunch together a few of these. I already stripped them off the feather. This would be like 4 of them. And I'm going to, again, use my wet fingers to make these things stick together. And I'm going to tie this right on top of the wing. Okay. And you can stop here and finish off the head of the fly, or if you like using peacock herl a lot, you can decide to do a little herl head here. Let's see if I left myself enough length to do that. So this gives a little extra zip to the fly at this point. So tie it off. And do a couple of whip finishes. And the fly.
So Thorin, what did you use that for?
I'm going to Jasper next week, and the rainbows and bull trouts in the Athabasca.
I made very similar flies for spring salmon and spring trout, sea run trout. It's a basic smell fly. I got dozens of them in my fly box.
Yeah, I can see this is a very basic idea. So,
and when you fish it, if you pulse it in the water, it's quite the action. It looks like it's swimming.
Yeah, that was my whole idea. That's why I liked when I read about this fly. So it's one of the newer patterns in Ray Bergman's book.
I actually make it with a bigger head. So that if you look at any of the smelt or anything, they usually have a disproportionate size head on them. Yeah. Yeah, that's good.
That's a bigger version of that. I was experimenting. I was doing, different. This is a pure Marabou fly, and I sometimes have difficulty if I have a very soft material like Marabou getting around the hook. So that's why I like to put a little bit of an underwing there.
I tell you what also works good on top of that peacock is about 6 strands of bear hair.
Actually, I was going to tie a version with a put a little topping of. I thought about that, adding a little bit of something to protect and keep that peacock herl in line a
Yeah.
little bit.
You don't want to use too many, but just, and the bear, they'll see the peacock through the bear if you use about 6 strands, but it also gives it that other dimension. Most smelt type have a black back, right? Or a green back, but they can be black green, and that's the effect it gives. That's one of my favorite flies.
Yeah, so you can use a variety of materials here. So here's pure marabou, right? So you go in and you tie some marabou.
The biggest trout I ever caught was about 8 pounds, and it was on a red and white marabou with a peacock head.
Yeah, that's that's exactly the next pattern I was gonna do. I have some prepared. I have some prepared hooks here.
Yeah,
And I want to do exactly that. Some red and white.
I don't know what it is, but even in lures, red and white is a great pattern.
Well, red and white is a great color combo. What size do you tie your flies in?
Number 2, long shank.
Oh, big ones. Okay. Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
doing
they were,
these things.
but they were big fish.
Yeah, I got used to catching bigger fish on smaller flies. Like, for some reason, the Athabasca bulls seem to prefer size 10 flies.
Yeah,
You give them a size 8 and they scoff at it. They say, nah, too big. Not interested, not tasting.
yeah. Well, that's what you do. You do experiments.
Yeah, so that was the one that I found worked for me reasonably well. So that's I'm gonna finish building this wing, and I'll show you what it looks like if you do the thing with a peacock here.
Oh, these as we were talking earlier, Florin, I think these would work really well as smolt patterns when you get smolts coming down from the river after about this time of year. You could
Yeah, and you can do the colors of your choice. Like the other version was the one with that I gave Dave the information. He posted it, and there are photographs there. Is with a yellow marabou.
Yeah.
And the topping, instead of peacock herl, just use some natural brown ostrich feather. That looks pretty nice too, by the way.
I think you could probably right now take these out to Souk and try fishing for some sea run gutties.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably.
Anything like a smolt or a sand lance even, I think would be a good imitation of those.
Yeah, so this is more of an idea than a specific pattern, like you do whatever you think is,
Are you fishing in the rivers?
I'm
Yeah,
sorry?
Yeah, and Athabasca's fishing in the Athabasca River.
So my plan is to use this for river fishing, yeah.
Florin, this is a good, can you see that?
Oh, yeah.
I got a Tunson head. I have a hackle, followed by a white marabou, followed by a red marabou with a silver body and some red crystal flash out the back. That's the one I used to murder the sea trout run on.
This is like, there was that, what is it called? The Parmesan bell, which is this red white with married wings, and it looks like a bit of a pain to do all that work, but it's kind of trying to do the red and white combo without
but
so
you should
here's what
try.
I thought of trying on top, like put a little bit of give it a bit of mallard flank here.
Yeah,
And here's an easy way to do it. You put a couple of thread turns, not very hard. See, this is not in position, so you just maneuver it in place so it sits on top of the wing. And when you're happy where it is, then you tighten things up. And you don't have to worry about, folding and
the
marrying
mallard
segments of stuff. Sorry?
The mallard kind of overpowers your peacock curl. That's why I used
It's
to
a little
use.
bit, much, but
Yeah, but try
this-
the black bear hair when you get a chance.
see, if you like, I have to put it in water to see. It
Yeah.
kind of hides it a little bit,
Yeah,
but it also gives it a different color scheme. So probably a bit more peacock, or just use the mallard for topping as well, and you can use the peacock as a bit of a stripe. So because this mallard for a back also makes it look pretty fishy, and it creates this kind of razzle dazzle camouflage and motion. Yeah. So anyway, so that was basically the idea. I just wanted to show some variations, and yes, absolutely, I have a bunch of prepared hooks I want to do next with white and red. So
Dave, Florin, thank you very much. I gotta go.
All right, thanks, Bill.
okay, thank you.
Or if we're done, I'll stop the recording.
Yeah.